Hello, my name is Oliver and welcome to my workshop. In today's video we are going to be removing the rusty, horrible fuel tank from underneath of the Dyane, as well as cleaning up all of the boot area and preparing it for its new panel. Let's get stuck in, shall we? I'll have to put Sean somewhere safe. So we've removed the back seat and put a sheet over the front seats just so we don't get anything on them. And now I need to remove the fuel tank. Now you can disconnect the lines from the fuel tank in a 2CV6 with a hatch that's in the boot floor. Well, actually it's kind of under the back seats, but that doesn't exist in a Dyane. So what I've got to do is I've got to crawl under the car and disconnect it manually. Or directly, should I say. Oh no, my hat. Right, so currently I'm just loosening the tank. I'm not going to remove any bolts. Just loosen every single bolt and then put a trolley jack under it and then start removing bolts after that. Because the last thing that I want is a face full of fuel tank. So 2 on the sides and 2 on the front. And the 2 on the front are on tabs, not holes, so you don't actually have to undo the bolts all the way. That's the good news. You just have to loosen them. And it's a really good idea if you clean the underneath of your car first before you do this. Now, even if I wasn't replacing the fuel tank, if you're going to be welding or cutting or doing anything in the boot floor, I would definitely remove the fuel tank, because the last thing that you want is any sort of fuel vapour anywhere near where you're cutting or welding or any sort of spark. This side is the earth strap. Oh, there we go. Okay, there we go. Last one. There we go. And now we can drop the fuel tank down. Glamorous assistant. I don't know what I'm saying. I used to always say glamorous assistant, my glamorous assistant in these videos, but now you know it's my dad, so. Or is it? Now then, I've just had a thought. We haven't disconnected the fuel filler. So can we jack it back up a bit? These are the pre-Jubilee clips that rotate thusly. There is no Jubilee clip on top on the fuel line. It's just pushed on. Oh, and it's split. Thank you. Remember, people, don't use bolts in your fuel lines to bung them up. We're going to replacing this anyway. But someone's bodged this badly. Have you got those side cuts? Someone has put a piece of plastic aquarium tube in inside the fuel line. There we go. Oh, it stinks. There we go. I'm going to replace the fuel line anyway. But yeah, don't put bolts in your fuel lines because it wrecks the fuel line inside. Oh, right. No, I'm no longer being covered in petrol. And it's just a push fitting on the fuel sender. And of course the ground wire, which was on one of the bolts on the side of the tank. Oh, that was not pleasant. That got covered in fuel. Not too bad. Rat poo covered, rat poo and rust. Now I'm going to have a clean up because there's obviously there's fuel and there's rust and there's rubbish everywhere. Now, someone had put a piece of plastic tubing and just pushed it into the fuel line. I don't know why. I didn't cut it here. It was cut and then just pushed together, and there's no Jubilee clip on there, which is obviously really dangerous. And when I pushed the plastic bung in, even though I had to chop the fuel line off and then push the plastic bung in, that straw, or whatever it was, it looked like a straw for WD-40 can. That straw was then pushed in a little bit, was pushed into the fuel line, but that doesn't matter because we're going to be replacing all of this fuel line anyway for new ethanol safe stuff. This is something that I advise all classic car owners to do. Replace all of your fuel lines with ethanol safe, because it's much better than your pride and joy burning down because the fuel lines rot away. What's in the bottom of here will be horrible and rusty because it's a near 50-year-old can of fuel, and it's a near 50-year-old fuel tank, you know what I mean? So we won't necessarily be keeping this fuel, but we'll have a look at the condition of it because it's a really good indication of what's at the bottom of the tank. This is one of the problems with old fuel tanks, is that especially with ethanol over time, and most fuel now has ethanol in it, ethanol absorbs water. And what that does to a steel fuel tank is it rusts the absolute heck out of it. And so you get fine rust sediment blocking up your fuel filter, and also the float balls inside the carburetor. And so that's why it's one of the main reasons why we're actually going to be swapping out for a plastic fuel tank, which is from a later 2CV6. It's the exact same thing. There's two fuel tank sizes, by the way, for 2CVs. There is a 20 litre tank that the older cars use, and there's a 25 litre tank that the later cars use. You can put a later tank in an earlier car though, although it will make fuel gauge all wonky obviously, and you'll have to deal with that. And there's a couple of companies now out there making long range fuel tanks which are even bigger. So they're something to look into if you're going to be driving really long distances in your 2CV. You may want to, you may not. No one gives shop vacs any love as kind of a tool that you must have in your workshop. But quite honestly, this is one of the most useful tools you can have. Now, this fuel tank actually doesn't look to be in too bad condition. It's obviously not rusting holes anywhere or anything like that. So I won't be throwing it away, I will keep it. And if plastic tanks, it might come in handy for a future project, you never know. But if plastic tanks are not available for your classic car, there's a bunch of companies out there that offer tank coatings for steel tanks. So you can pop your steel tank out, send it to them, they coat it all inside and make it nice, and that makes it ethanol safe apparently. But one of the most common questions I get asked lately is about fuel quality and about what I use in my 2CV, well, what we use in our 2CVs and stuff. We use premium fuel, which here in France is 98. I find that it burns a lot cleaner and a lot better than the cheaper stuff. And because of that, we get better fuel economy, but also we get better, smoother running. And I and all my friends, I don't use any fuel additives or anything. All 2CVs after about 1960 are completely fine to run on unleaded. They were designed for it. They're an aluminium head with a hardened valve seating anyway, because it's an aluminium head. So they're completely fine. Citroen put out multiple press releases over the decades saying, now we're good for unleaded fuel, now we're good for unleaded fuel. The engines and the head design and the valve seat design did not change. So I run my 63 on unleaded with no additive, run this on unleaded, no additive, and we run it on premium fuel. That just shows, see this line of rubbish here? That just shows how much schmutz can be in the bottom of an old fuel tank. So we'll have to filter this before it goes in the new tank, because there's no point putting a load of rust into a brand new tank. Right, here's another tidbit of information for you. One of the most common things I see at shows that's wrong with cars, any 2CV show, any car show, there's always 2CVs, Dyanes and stuff, with this rubber gaiter either missing, rotted away, I've even seen one car where it was painted over and it was just this like rotten, mushy lump of goo that was stuck to the rear wing. But if you remove, this one has been replaced, but still, if you move this down, you'll notice that there's a big dint here, and on the other side there is 2 holes where this car is driven around with it rubbing either here or here, and it is actually rubbed through the filler tube, as thick as this is. And so obviously that can leak fuel down the outside of your car. It's dangerous. On a hot day you'll have fuel evaporating from your fuel tank, which will affect your fuel economy thinking. It's very bad and very dangerous, and definitely something to look out for. So all 2CV, AMI, Dyane owners out there, check your fuel filler necks. That's the piece of plastic tubing that was inside the fuel line. That's all that was holding this fuel line together in this car. That's it, just shoved in. And you'll notice that the fuel line is much thinner at one end than it is at the other. And it's much softer and gooier. That's what ethanol does. So it just goes to show this definitely needed replacing. Now, this is our repair panel, and it's available as pieces as well as one big piece like this, so this panel and this panel. But in my experience, if it's rusted out here, it's also rusted out along the bottom here, as is evidenced by our Dyane. If you come and have a look, we have a rusty hole in here, and we also have rust here. So if we were just going to replace the boot floor, we'd be welding a brand new panel to a rusty panel. There's no point doing that. So if you're going to replace it to the next panel that's actually solid and nice and lovely. In this case we have solid nice sides, and we have a little bit of surface rust there, but we'll deal with that. And we have a nice panel here. So we're going to replace the whole thing as one unit. Should not be that easy to remove. It's self-removing.
This has been bodged up now.
Yep. Oh, well, we knew that, didn't we? Yeah, this lower bit is minty and factory, but this has been replaced at some point. And not very well. Dad, look at this goo here. It has, or at least this, because this is all spooged in here. Spooged. This is why I don't like patina in 1970s cars or modern cars. Anything past the early 60s is no good to patina, because it just rots. The steel quality dropped massively at the end of the 60s, or even to the middle of the 60s. Depends which country you're in and where your car was built. But pre-war stuff, the metal is horrible to weld. It's full of impurities. It's full of stuff that's really bad for the environment. And the good thing about that is that it patinas really well and it doesn't rot in holes. The same with 1950s stuff and early 60s stuff in a lot of countries that were involved in the Second World War, like France, because the metal was in France what's called plans pond metal, which is all recycled stuff from the war effort and is made of basically iron railings and melted German tanks. And that stuff is really, like 1950s 2CVs, early 60s 2CVs are much, much better at resisting rust than 1970s and 80s cars. 2CVs from those eras shouldn't be allowed to patina because they just rot. It's bad. It's this. And you don't want it. But think about that. If you're looking at a project and it has a bit of patina, think, you know, what era is it from, what country is it from, and what was their steel like at that time. One of the reasons why Italian cars rust isn't because they were made in Italy, it's because they were made of Russian steel. Because to keep the communists happy, the Agnelli family did a deal with Russia, and basically Russia gave them loads of cheap communist-made steel, and it was absolutely terrible. And that's why a lot of Fiats and Italian cars rust. That and a lot of kind of captive panels and like bits of trim. Again, 80s cars. Any car with plastic cladding, that's another one. You know, in the 80s, like every car got plastic cladding down the side. It can trap water, and then it just rusts out the back. So these are all things to think about when you're thinking of buying a project. And if you look at things like, you'll know about this, Opel Astras and Vauxhall Astras, there's a lot more 1300s left than there is GTEs. And the reason is the GTEs had plastic cladding. And that traps water, and then, I mean, they weren't that good when they were new, but they're really not good now. This is one of the reasons why we removed the fuel tank first. If I was doing this and the screwdriver went through and then punched a hole in the fuel tank, I'd never know. And because we're not removing the body from the chassis, these panels will have to come out this way, which is why we're taking them apart as much as possible. Now you can buy special drill bits for drilling out spot welds, but because we don't actually care about this panel, because we're just going to remove it, and it's mostly made of rust anyway, we're actually going to use a cone drill because it's much faster. Right, this is the problem with underseal. Underseal can be a really good thing and really good at stopping the underneath of your car getting stone chip damage. But when water gets under underseal, it doesn't show you where all the rust is. And the water can creep along under the underseal and rust away your panels without you even knowing. One of my recent revelations has been these Scotch-Brite grinder discs, which are absolutely superb at kind of delicate removal of paint and oxidation without damaging the metal underneath. They will eventually, if you keep going and keep going and keep going, obviously, but they're a lot more gentle than a flappy disc and a lot more gentle than a wire brush. And I get them in packs of 3 and they're super cheap, but they're really, really good. The other problem is you've got to make sure that you wear a mask when you use them because you don't want to be breathing Scotch-Brite and rust. Right, so that I can get to the inner seams, which are at the top of the boot and at the bottom of the boot, I'm going to have to take these outer wings off, which simply remove with nowhere near as many bolts as they should have been held in by. And you've just got to make sure this trim on a 2CV or a Dyane is aluminium, not stainless steel or anything. It's very soft, so you've just got to make sure you don't bash it or trap it. This is what I mean about the pieces of trim being thin and easily broken. And yeah, just be very, very careful because they only push in from the outside. Okay, so we've hit a little bit of a roadblock, and that is that the bottom of the wing has been attached by a previous owner using a wood screw. It doesn't want to come out. This is one of the reasons why most of these cars died. 2CVs, Dyanes, Amis. There was a point in time when you couldn't get parts, and nothing on a 2CV or a Dyane or any sort of a Citroen, even DS's, is standard. All of the thread pitches are non-standard, all of the screws are non-standard, and so a lot of them got bodged really badly, and these cars just got shoved back on the road as cheaply as possible. Because don't forget, there was a time when these cars weren't worth fixing. They weren't worth anything. They were everywhere. Even the French government tried to kill 2CVs and Dyanes. And so a lot of the cars that you'll find now, even cars that are worth a lot of money and people will pay a lot of money for, have been badly bodged. So here we have the standard 11mm bolt there, and at the top here we have another one of those sheet metal screws. And like I say, this is because the roads were rough, the cars got driven, things vibrated out and people lost bolts and stuff. And because they were all a non-standard size, you couldn't buy bolts. You know, my mum's own Dyane, the first version of this car, was lost to the pages of time because the boot rusted out, and then the floor in the front rusted out because they're the two most common areas for rust. And she couldn't get panels to replace the parts, and she couldn't do the job herself. And the only garage that would even touch her car was like 2-3 hours drive away. So if she took her car to the garage and it needed anything, it meant that she had to be without her car for days and days and days. And this was one of the things that made 2CVs and Dyanes and Amis so cheap for such a long time. And it's a real shame. But it's just, as buyers and lovers of these cars, it's just something that we have to deal with now. It's something that we have to look after and look out for, because, and it's something that if you're doing a restoration of one of these cars, can cost you a fortune. The Dyane's not so bad, but my car being an early 60s car, there's still a lot of specialists that don't carry parts for my car, and those that do, such as Defranos in Germany, charge a lot of money for them. In fact, it's become a running joke now that every single part on my car is the most expensive parts in the catalogue. Every single bit. And 2CVs are cheaper than other cars, but it doesn't mean they're cheap. You know, they're a really good first classic, and they're really nice to work on, but doesn't mean that they're not. You know, doesn't mean that it's not a lot of work. One of the reasons why I don't lament the fact that these cars are getting more expensive is that these cars are no longer getting bodged and they're actually getting restored, which is incredible. Although having said that, there was a car on the auction site Bring a Trailer recently that had a car that had a chassis that had been completely bodged. Right, you'll notice these boxes inside the wings. Now, we knew that they weren't supposed to be there, and we expected to encounter trouble. And this is one of the things that we plan on fixing in this video. I didn't talk about it in the other video because it's not my car, and I wanted to kind of be a bit discreet and first get permission before I talked about it. But one of the things that we're planning on getting rid of is these boxes, and we expected to find rot. And I expected actually to be much worse than it is. But if you have a look here, you'll have to come down on the floor camera. If you have a look on the inside here, it's missing this slice here. That's nowhere near as bad as I expected it to be. I expected it to be completely rotten away all on the inside. And it's had a previous repair that hasn't been done properly. I mean, it's not, you know, it's not superb, it's not good, but at least it's not fiberglass. And at least it's not just bogged with filler. And that's not too bad at all. We'll make a piece and weld it in and do the repair properly this time. But it's really good to know that it could have been so much worse. And that's the thing with any of these cars. Like, they've had a long life, they weren't worth a lot of money for a long time. Just like my 2CV. Exactly the exact same story, you know. A lot of these cars now, people in America are charging $45,000 for 2CV60s, right? And they're getting them at auction. And the fact is that they're in no better condition than this a lot of the time. But you need to expect to find it, and you need to expect that these are going to happen, and you're going to have fittings missing and bolts missing and bodged bits and wired bits, and it's really good to find a really good specialist if you're not mechanical, and have them check over the car first. And I say this a lot to people who message me and ask me, like, I want a 2CV, what should I do? You know, if you can buy from a really reputable specialist that, you know, in the UK there's Peak 2CV, who's a friend of both mine and Dyane, who's Hubnut. And there's a bunch of 2CV specialists out there, and there's a bunch of importers as well that are very reputable. But get a good, you know, get one that's referred to you from someone else who's bought a car from them and had a really good experience and not had a lot of trouble. Because there's a lot of cars out there that are like this, but that's okay, and we're going to fix it and we're going to make it beautiful again. But it's just part of it. Like I said, it's part of classic cars, and it's part of cars that for a long time weren't worth a lot of money. So I'm having to take the bumper off and the tow bar to get to this front edge of the, or rather the back edge of the boot floor. And it's been a bit stubborn, but we're winning, slowly but surely. Well, what an absolute mission that was. It's been really difficult to find the spot welds because it's been patched and filled and all this. The spot welds have been really difficult to find, and we can't exactly use a Scotch-Brite head in here next to Pandora making loads of mess. So what we're going to do is, my dad's managed to unpick this rail, and I've cut out all the boot with a pair of tin snips. It's not the neatest job in the world, but it doesn't need to be, because now what happens is we can take it outside, we can Scotch-Brite around all this edge with the grinder, and find our spot welds, drill out our spot welds, and then remove the fine ribbon rather than trying to remove the whole panel. You know, it's really difficult to sit in the rusty boot while you remove the rusty boot. It's like, you know, sitting on a branch while you're trying to saw it off. It doesn't really work. But I'm actually really happy with the condition. We knew there was rust up here, and that rust is nowhere near as bad as it as we thought it might be, and so we don't need to order new inner wings, which is good. And there's no rust in the chassis. There's no nothing. It just needs wire brushing off, cleaning, and painting, which is fantastic news. I'm really happy with it. Like I said, I've stabbed myself a bunch, so we need to clean all the blood off it now and clean up all this rust. But looking on the bright side of things, you know, it always looks bad when you get to this stage of doing any sort of panel replacement, and it's difficult at the minute because we don't have an air chisel. We don't have the modern tools that you would use in a professional shop to do this. And you know, you'll notice on this channel that we do such a varied amount of work in these videos, and so it would be impossible to buy every single tool. You know, and not everybody has every single tool. That's the thing as well. Like, you can't, if you spent all your money on tools, if I spent all my money on every single tool needed to do every single one of these jobs in these videos, I'd have no money to do the job. You know, you just got to make do and mend. But that's what you're like at home, I'm sure. You know, some of you will have the air tools to do it, but I bet 98% of you don't. But you don't need 98. You know, you don't need all of the kit to do the thing. Sometimes you can do it by hand. It just takes a little bit more time and a little bit more patience. You have to be really careful with these Scotch-Brite pads, because when it hits a patch of filler, the filler just goes boof, and the grinder has a tendency to kick, and you have to make sure that you don't run into yourself, like as in a leg or an arm or something, because if you do, it'll really hurt. So yeah, just watch yourself. Like I said, you don't know what's under there, so you've got to give yourself plenty of space, not put your face near it. The spot welds actually aren't in this side; they're in the bottom face and under here. That's why I had a sneaking suspicion. That's why I wasn't too bothered about bending this. But what I'm going to have to do is delicately remove everything and just be sure and just be patient. This is the thing, when you've not done it before. I'm sure there are people who have done this panel replacement of this particular boot before. I've never taken a Dyane apart, and so I'm just being careful, and I'm just watching as I go and trying to do the best I can, really. So the flange we've discovered is along here. And these spot welds. So I've cut this little edge off because we've discovered that all the spot welds are in this bottom edge. There's not actually that many of them, and I'm wondering whether to actually drill them, because obviously there's not a lot of stiffness or thickness in that panel, or whether to just grind them back until they don't exist anymore. Obviously I'm being very careful of fire, because that's the last thing I want. So I've just got to clean this edge up now because it's razor sharp, and then address these. I'm going to clean it up more first and just get it the best I can, and then yeah, I might just grind them back because it's not very thick. It's not even half a millimetre thick, this steel edge. We'll see how we go. This is the thing, when you've never done something before, there is absolutely no shame in just taking it slowly and just figuring it out, you know. Everybody does this thing where they pretend that, oh, you have to know everything, you have to have all the tools, and you have to have done everything before you can ever attempt anything. And it really isn't true. You know, there's a first time for everything, isn't there? So, yeah, I'm just taking it slow. Because, like I said, I've never replaced a Dyane boot panel before. I've never done panel repair. Well, I've never done panel replacement on any kind of 2CV or Dyane. So, learning how it all goes together is a process. And next time I do it, I'll know and I'll be much faster. But the better job I do on this means I won't need to replace a panel on it for 40 years. So, should be alright. We'll get there. Here we go, look, slowly, slowly. We just pull that ribbon of metal away. And once we can get behind it, this is the panel that we're going to weld on new panel 2. This is this. Because if it was thicker metal, if it was a thicker car, and if it was all a bit more solid, like it was here, you can actually drill those out. But when it's on something that's this thin, like, there's no chance. And the best way I can think of doing it is to slowly thin this metal out, and then you can just remove it gently. It's a bit more time consuming, but it is what it is. There's probably a way of doing it that people have figured out, but this is how I'm doing it. Oh, I'm going to get some comments on this one. I can already hear them. You're doing it wrong! I've been replacing Dyane floor panels for 64 years, even before they were made. I bought an extremely expensive Dyane floor pan replacing tool, and now I must justify my purchase of said tool. And it is the only way, the only way. I'm not taking the mick off you, by the way, my lovely viewers. You're all fantastic. And 99.999% of you are absolutely superb and super supportive and awesome. Hello. So, we've ground all of this back, removed all of the fringe all the way around. And so we're down to just this panel, and of course this back panel and that one. And now it's time to wire brush it all off, get as much of the loose rust off as possible, and then rust treat it all. We're also going to wire brush all the chassis and clean everything up that we can clean up, because we're in here and it's easier to do the top of, like, when else are you going to have an opportunity to do the top of the chassis other than removing the entire body? So yeah, cracking on. It's been a bit of a fight, but we've managed it, and it's just a matter of taking it slowly. Dad has also produced, Dad, show us that panel. Dad has also produced a new exhaust hanger for the rear that goes along the other side of this piece here, because the bottom, it's got a little bit of rust on it, and so that'll replace that with a brand new and shiny exhaust hanger, which is lovely. Thank you, Dad. And we've checked, our new panel fits perfectly, but like I said, it's all in the preparation, and there's a lot of preparation to do, and the more preparation we do, even aside from fitting the new panel, like I said, wire brushing off the chassis and stuff like that, because it's not in bad condition. It is remarkably good. This chassis, it's like brand new. It's a little bit of surface rust, but that's it. But it's a really good opportunity now to wire brush it all off and get it all repainted and sorted for when we put the fuel tank back in. Because we could just put the boot floor in and then try and do it when we put the fuel tank in. But now, if I sit on the ground, I can actually do the back of the chassis properly and stuff. So it's worth taking the time to do. You know, no point rushing it now and repenting later. You know, regretting later. That's the word. Right, let's get cracking, shall we? It's very hot. It's officially French summer now, and it's incredibly warm. We didn't film the cutting off of the edge all the way around because all my neighbours have been haymaking yesterday, and it was the sound of tractors for a few hours. So the audio would have been completely unusable. It was all dusty and as haymaking is. But the good news is that my hay fever's a bit better because we've got rid of all the hay. So, like I said, let's get cracking, and hopefully by the end of today we'll have all of this all rust-proofed and stuff. Because before we paint it, before we prime it, we're going to rust-proof everything, and that kills off any rust that may be lurking anywhere. Because obviously if you don't get rid of all the rust and you put new panels in, then the rust just starts again and rots away your new panels. Right, get cracking. Would you mind closing this? I feel like boot golem. I've lived in here for days now. Goodbye. Farewell. Hello. After a lot closer inspection, this inner wing needs replacing. We could make it right, we could make it nice, and we could keep this panel in and put a new patch in the top and a new patch in this end and a new patch along the bottom. But when we've looked at it from the other side, and when we've cleaned up all the undercoat on the other side, it's got a load of rusty pinholes in it, so the panel is very thin in a lot of places. And as much as we could redo this all and make this all nice, it's at times like this you have to ask yourself, how much is your own time worth? You know, to some people it might be worth using this original panel and grafting in a bunch of patches and making it all as original. Or you could just spend 120 euros and get a new panel. And that's what we've decided to do, because it would take, to make this as good as new, it would take a couple of days work, and that's more than we want to spend doing it. Really, it's unnecessary. You know, what's worth more to you, 120 euros or 2 days of your life? And so we've decided to bite the bullet and buy a new panel. The good news is that doesn't stop us putting the floor in or anything like that, because this panel actually welds to the floor, and the floor needs to be in place to put this panel in. So unfortunately, the nice exhaust bracket my dad made is no longer needed, but I'm sure it will come in handy one day. We'll keep it in stock, and one day it may be needed, but not now, because we'll order a new one. Like I said, it will arrive from Germany in a couple of days, and we'll get it welded in. Now we've got all of the loose rust knocked off, we're going to paint it with some rust converter. What rust converter does is it changes the rust on a chemical, any like little bits of surface rust that are left over, it changes it on a chemical level so that it's no longer rust, and then you can paint it over again and not worry about the rust coming back. And because no matter what you do, no matter how much you clean, you're always going to have like microscopic particles of rust on the metal. So this stuff stops the rust being rust. So we've got a cut-off bottle, and I'm going to pop some from here into there. You see a lot of people with paintbrush dipping it back like this, but what you're actually doing then is you're transferring rust particles into your bottle of rust converter, which isn't good. So it's okay if you're only going to use the bottle once, but if you're just doing it for a small job, it's no good because it wrecks the rust converter. So, ooh, this stuff's brown. I've never used this stuff before. It's by Bardile. Bardile? I'm going to put a little bit in. Because inevitably somebody knocks it over. I was just about to say, inevitably somebody knocks it over and gets it everywhere. Like that. I'm sure they put it in a tiny little bottle specifically so you knock it over. So put a tiny little bit in my cup, and I've got a brush. I'm going to paint the chassis, all the edges and the inner wings except for the one that we're going to replace. We're just going to methodically go over it, make sure we don't miss any. I've used not this product, but a similar product previously, and the other stuff I hated. They make some stuff that does the same job, but it's gloopy, and the gloopy stuff's rubbish. You want something that's really runny like this. It does a far better job. I don't know whether it's in my head, but it smells like HP sauce. Or your brown sauce of choice. It smells like HP sauce. It's not in my head. Well, I like this for nothing else other than the fact that it smells quite nice. Now I've got to leave this rust cure for 24 hours to cure, so I'll leave you all here. If you'd like to support the channel, the best way to do that is by clicking like, telling your friends about the videos, and of course making sure that you are subscribed. If you've watched more than 3 of these videos and you're not subscribed, what are you playing at? Click my face to subscribe. There's a playlist there to Jolene, there's a playlist there to Pandora, and a playlist there to the Dyane, so you can watch even more videos. Thank you all for watching. Please be awesome to each other, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye bye.